I always thought I knew my friends inside out. We grew up together, shared secrets, and had each other's backs through thick and thin. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I stumbled upon something so twisted, so messed up, that it made me question everything I thought I knew about them and about myself. It was one of those things you hear about in urban legends or creepy internet stories, the kind of stuff you tell around a campfire to freak out your friends. But this wasn't just a story. This was real, and it was happening right in front of me. It all started innocently enough, just a regular Friday night hangout at my friend Jake's place. We were doing what we always did, playing video games, trash-talking each other, and raiding the fridge for snacks. The night was supposed to be like any other, but there was something off that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The atmosphere felt different. Jake and the others kept exchanging these weird looks, like they were in on some joke that I wasn't a part of. There were awkward silences too, where everyone just kind of stared at each other before someone broke the tension with a forced laugh. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe they were just planning some prank to get a rise out of me. But as the night went on, the feeling only got stronger. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find out what it was in the worst way possible. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I wasn't sure what had stirred me at first, maybe a noise or a weird dream. But as I lay there, I realized the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I glanced over to where Jake and the others were supposed to be sleeping, but their sleeping bags were empty. My heart started pounding in my chest. Were they just messing with me? Pulling some elaborate prank? I decided to find out, so I quietly got up and slipped out of the room. I could hear faint voices coming from outside, so I carefully made my way to the back door. The cool night air hit me as I stepped out onto the porch, and I saw them, Jake, Mark, and the rest of the guys, walking toward the woods behind the house. I hesitated for a moment, then followed them, keeping my distance so they wouldn't spot me. As I got closer, I could see a faint glow ahead, flickering between the trees. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, like something was watching me from the shadows. I crept closer until I could see them clearly, gathered around a small clearing in the woods. There was a fire burning in the middle, casting long, twisted shadows across their faces. And they were chanting low, rhythmic words that I couldn't quite make out. My stomach twisted in a knot as I realized this wasn't a prank. Whatever they were doing, they were dead serious about it. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of initiation ritual? A weird hazing thing? But as I watched, the air around the fire seemed to shimmer, and the flames flared up, turning a deep, unnatural shade of blue. That's when I realized this was something much darker than I could have ever imagined. I wanted to run, to get the hell out of there, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding in front of me. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and I could see the strain on their faces as they continued. It was like they were in a trance, completely focused on whatever they were trying to summon. And then, suddenly, one of the guys, Ryan, collapsed to the ground, his body jerking and convulsing like he was having a seizure. The chanting stopped immediately, and everyone rushed to his side, shaking him, slapping his face, trying to wake him up. But Ryan was unresponsive, his eyes rolled back in his head. Panic set in as they realized something had gone horribly wrong. I watched in horror as they tried everything to revive him, but nothing worked. And then, just as quickly as it had started, Ryan's body went still. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the crackling of the fire. And that's when I saw it, something in the flames. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. Its face was twisted, contorted into a grotesque smile, and its eyes, those eyes looked right at me, like it knew I was there. I stumbled back, nearly falling as I tried to get away, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd just seen. But nothing made sense. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But as I turned and ran, I knew deep down that it was real. Whatever my friends had been messing with, it had answered their call. The next day, I couldn't bring myself to face any of them. I stayed in my room, replaying the events of the night before in my head, trying to convince myself that it was all just some elaborate prank. But when Jake showed up at my door later that afternoon, I could tell he wasn't there to mess with me. He looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn, like he hadn't slept at all. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice as I asked him how Ryan was doing. Jake hesitated before answering, and that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. He told me Ryan was fine, at least physically, but there was something off about him, something none of them could explain. He was acting like his old self, cracking jokes and pretending nothing had happened, but his eyes were empty, like he wasn't really there anymore. I felt sick to my stomach as Jake went on, telling me how they'd taken Ryan to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. They said it was just stress, that he needed rest, but I knew better. I'd seen what happened out there in the woods. I'd seen that thing in the fire, and I knew it had taken something from Ryan, something he was never going to get back. Jake tried to play it off like it was no big deal, just some weird accident, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew as well as I did that they'd opened a door they shouldn't have, and now they couldn't close it. I wanted to tell him what I'd seen, to warn him to stay away from that clearing, but the words stuck in my throat. I was too scared to admit the truth, too scared of what might happen if I did. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to distance myself from the group, but it was hard. We'd been through so much together, and I didn't want to believe they were capable of something so dark. But every time I looked at Ryan, I was reminded of that night, of the thing I'd seen in the flames, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching, waiting. One night, Mark called me out of the blue, his voice trembling with fear. He told me he couldn't sleep, that every time he closed his eyes, he saw that symbol from the clearing, the one burned into the ground after the fire went out. He said it was following him, showing up in places it shouldn't be, on the walls of his room, in his dreams, even in the reflection of his bathroom mirror. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to help him, but I didn't even know how to help myself. That's when Mark dropped the bombshell. He told me they'd tried the ritual again, this time without me, and something had gone horribly wrong. One of the guys had disappeared, just vanished into thin air during the ceremony. They'd searched everywhere for him, but there was no trace. It was like he'd never existed. And now, Mark was convinced that the same thing was going to happen to him, that whatever they'd summoned was coming for them one by one. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as Mark's words sank in. I wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, that it was just his imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew he was right. They'd messed with something beyond their control, and now they were paying the price. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise, every shadow seemed like a threat, like something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but the memories kept flooding back. The fire, the chanting, Ryan's lifeless body, and that thing in the flames. I knew I had to do something, but what? How do you fight something you can't even understand? The next day, I went back to the clearing, hoping to find some answers. The place looked different in the daylight, almost peaceful, but I could still feel the residual energy, like the ground itself was tainted by what had happened there. I walked over to where the fire had been and knelt down, tracing the symbol in the dirt with my finger. It was still there, burned into the earth, a constant reminder of the darkness we'd unleashed. As I stood there, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. But as I turned back to the symbol, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small, blackened object buried in the dirt. I reached down and pulled it out, wiping away the dirt to reveal a charred piece of bone. My stomach churned as I realized what it was, and I dropped it like it had burned me. I knew then that I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to stop on its own. I had to confront my friends, had to make them understand the gravity of what they'd done. But as I made my way back to Jake's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. When I arrived, the place was empty. No sign of Jake, Mark, or any of the others. I called out their names, but there was no answer. Panic set in as I searched the house, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But then, I found it, a note scrawled in Jake's handwriting, lying on his bed. It was short, just a few words, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. We went back. Don't follow us. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to rush to the clearing to try and stop whatever they were doing, but another part of me was too scared, too paralyzed by the fear of what I might find. In the end, I did nothing. I just stood there, staring at that note, feeling more helpless than I'd ever felt in my life. That night, I waited by the phone, hoping for a call, for some sign that they were okay. But the hours passed in silence, and by morning, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. I tried calling their phones, but they all went straight to voicemail. It was like they'd just vanished, leaving me alone with the weight of everything that had happened. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of them. The police were called, but there was no evidence, no clues, nothing to suggest where they might have gone. It was like they'd just disappeared off the face of the earth. And maybe they had. Maybe whatever they'd summoned had finally come to collect its due. I tried to move on, tried to live a normal life, but it was impossible. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched, like something was following me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't escape the memories, the nightmares that haunted me every time I closed my eyes. And then one night I got a call. It was Mark's voice, but it was faint, distant, like he was calling from the other side of a long tunnel. He didn't say much, just that they were trapped, that they'd made a terrible mistake, and that there was no way out. He begged me to forgive them, to forget what had happened, and then the line went dead. I tried calling him back, but there was no answer. I haven't heard from him since. I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe they're all dead, or maybe they're trapped in some otherworldly dimension, paying the price for their curiosity. All I know is that I'm left here, alone, with the burden of their secrets and the knowledge that sometimes there are things better left undiscovered. If you've ever felt like your friends were hiding something from you, or if you've had a similar experience, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these rituals and what you think they might mean. And don't forget to check out my other videos for more eerie and unsettling stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss them.